Great. Welcome back to the House Healthcare Committee for Wednesday afternoon. We're starting with the Vermont Creative Economy Day, and we have Julia Doucette with us from the Open Door Clinic. So, Julia, I'm going to just turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, and good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here for the Vermont Creative Network Day, being organized by the Vermont Creative Network. The organization works to support artists and cultural organizations as well as the creative economy across the state. Before I begin, I'm going to distract you a little bit with some party favors. I'm going to pass out individual booklets that are in Spanish for anyone who knows Spanish. And on the other way, I'm going to hand around a book just so you have some context as I talk about what I'm talking about.
Great.
So I will start that with you. I will just start those, take one, or however you want to work it. So I'm Julia Doucette. I am going to read rather than speak to you, only because I think that will keep me in time.
Great.
And at the end, I'm hoping to leave some room for questions. So I'm a nurse case manager at the Open Door Clinic in Middlebury, and we are a free clinic for adults who are uninsured or underinsured with incomes below 300% of the federal poverty level. We offer bilingual medical and dental care, including mental health and physical therapy, thanks to over 100 volunteers. Half of the patients that we see in our clinic are immigrant agricultural workers from rural, impoverished Mexico and Central America. So who remembers the ad campaign in the 70s for peanut butter cups? Does that sound familiar at all? Okay, well, to jog your memory, chocolate and peanut butter are two great tastes that taste great together. Yes. I'm here today to talk about another unlikely combination that go great together: art or creativity and medicine. This combination has helped improve a marginalized and often hidden yet essential part of our community, that of our patients. I'm going to start with the story of Jose Luis, and actually one of his stories is around somewhere.
Okay.
At 45 years old, Jose had never left his small rural village in the mountains of Chiapas, Mexico, where he lived with his wife and 4 children. His life was one of subsistence farming, just as his fathers and grandfathers had been before him. He worked from sunup to sundown, growing corn, tomatoes, beans, and chilies. With almost every waking hour consumed by work, he had little time for anything else. Over time, he found it increasingly difficult to feed his 4 children and to pay for their education. His cousin had left Mexico and found work on a dairy farm in Vermont, sending money home for his family to build a house, expand their coffee farm, and buy a truck to transport their crops to the market. Jose Luis thought about all the opportunities that his family could enjoy if he joined his cousin. He decided to migrate to the United States. Because our immigration system does not offer a legal pathway for year-round agricultural work, Jose Luis was forced to spend 6 days in the inhospitable desert. It was a long, arduous, and dangerous journey. And I have to say it's good that I wrote it down, because otherwise I would go off and speak about that. When Jose Luis arrived in Vermont, he found a job on a dairy farm in Madison County. He worked long days, entering the milking parlor at 3 a.m. and leaving at 3 p.m. He had 1 day off every 15 days. It was difficult, repetitive work. He missed his family, his home, and the language, food, and culture of Mexico. He found the weather challenging, like all of us do, and felt encerrado, which means stuck, by his lack of transportation and documentation status. He lived in fear. He was afraid of being targeted due to his skin color and afraid of getting sick or injured, because if he couldn't work, he would lose income, and being in Vermont was all about earning money. The decision to come to the United States by these workers is often not a decision at all. It's a necessity forced upon people trying to survive where there are very few economic opportunities to do so. Many children abandon their education after 6th grade to help support their families. The lure of stable employment and good wages in the U.S. is tempting despite the tremendous risk involved in the journey. Jose Luis is just one of 500 Spanish-speaking patients that we see each year in our clinic. Many patients come in complaining of a variety of physical symptoms. They are tired but unable to sleep. They have lost weight but are unable to eat or don't feel hungry. Their head aches, their bones ache. After many appointments, diagnostic imaging, and lab tests, we are often unable to diagnose any medical condition that accounts for their symptoms. We are left to conclude that they are physical manifestations of chronic stress, anxiety, and the emotional burden of being stripped of all things familiar and comforting. They are overwhelmed with a suffering that they cannot name. As a registered nurse working directly with these men and women, I was at a loss of how to help. Mental health clinicians, as you know, in our state are overburdened and have long wait lists. Very few of them are bilingual or bicultural. Imagine trying to share your inner private thoughts and feelings with an English-speaking mental health provider, only to have them filtered through an interpreter. Furthermore, access to mental health care is expensive, making it financially infeasible for our patients who earn minimum wage and are ineligible for state-subsidized insurance. And mental health counseling is not a culturally familiar or understood concept. The type of care our patients might seek in their home countries, such as treatment from traditional healers, priests, herbalists, or hueseros, which are bone setters, is not available here. So with the lack of access to mental health care through more traditional channels, we had to think outside of the box to come up with a way to help support our patients. While searching for ways to address these issues, I met with a mental health clinician who had experience working with migrant women in Florida. As I left our meeting, she said, never underestimate the power of a personal story. Could sharing and hearing other people's stories help our patients feel less alone? Could bearing witness to someone's truth and experience allow us as clinicians to help alleviate the psychic suffering of our patients? Maya Angelou once said, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. 38% of the Latin American migrant workers here in Vermont have less than a 6th grade level of education. And even those with higher education levels are often uncomfortable reading and navigating large blocks of text. Almost 10% of the population are Indigenous language speakers, which means Spanish is actually their second language. If we were to sit down and collect stories from our patients, how would we be able to make them accessible to such a low literacy population? So here is where the chocolate meets the peanut butter. It was a VPR drive me moment, and I do acknowledge that now I need to call it a Vermont public driveway moment, but I'm going to put that aside for a second. I was sitting in my car when VP shared a piece about the Center for Cartoon Studies, a school dedicated to teaching cartooning right here in Vermont. I didn't know such a place existed, and I didn't know that it was so close to us. But the reporter spoke on about the CCS students' involvement in community projects and the benefits of using visual art in non-traditional settings. Comics are a culturally familiar medium in Mexico. They've historically been used to address everything from entertainment to politics. Comics could be the perfect solution to the literacy conundrum. We could use graphic art to illustrate the workers' stories. And thus, the most costly journey, or El Viaje Más Caro, was born. My colleagues, Teresa Maris, who's an anthropologist from UVM, and Naomi Walcott McCausland, who's a migrant health coordinator from UVM Extension's Bridges to Health, and I began to collect stories from workers across the state. These stories reflected common themes in the population: traumatic journeys, family separation, community alienation, and the positive and negative coping skills they used to navigate these challenges. Working with Vermont Folklife, Merrick Bennett's Comic Workshop, and local cartoon artists, we created a series of 20 individual Spanish language graphic booklets, which are going around in Spanish right now. We distributed these stories individually and collectively at the Open Door Clinic, on farm visits in countries where migrant workers lived, and throughout the state, both through our Migrant Health Network and our Migrant Education Program. We used them to open up difficult conversations with workers, discovering that one's experiences are not unique and that others have endured the same or similar traumas can be a great relief and foster a safe space to begin to speak about the unspeakable. Often just knowing that someone is willing to witness the darkness and accompany you through it can bring deep comfort and healing. Using comics was a key that opened the door for many workers. And I do want to just take a divergence for a second. Interestingly enough, the grant from the Vermont Community Foundation to start this first project of comic books, Christopher Kaufman Hillstrup, was working for Vermont Communities Foundation then, and we're going to come back to him in a little bit. So keep that in the back of your mind. So Guadalupe was one of these people, and we were talking about using comics as a key for people. She has the pink story that was circulating, and she shared her personal journey through an abusive relationship and ensuing healing. The experience of seeing her story in that comic book in pictures helped her to externalize her experience. She could see the drawn character at the heart of her story with a compassion, empathy, and tenderness that she denied to herself. Guadalupe's story is one of fierce love, strength, and survival. Seeing that character on the page helped Guadalupe turn forgiveness and acceptance on herself, a powerful step toward healing. She had never shared these experiences with anyone, stymied by shame and a lack of words to explain the depth and complexities of what she had survived. This medium was a powerful tool. She was able to take that pink comic book to her family and say, "This is me, and this is my story." Our storytelling project has taken on a life of its own that has far exceeded our expectations. With the generous support of local Vermont granting agencies, we were able to translate the Spanish booklets first into English and then publish them all together as an anthology. In an incredible stroke of luck and serendipity, and this is where it goes back to Christopher, this book was chosen by Vermont Humanities as the 2022 Vermont Reads book. There are books, if anyone is interested, down below in the pavilion? Card room. So, comics provide an accessible visual format that can simultaneously entertain, educate, and immerse the reader in someone else's life. They can be used, therefore, to educate the broader public about the everyday lives and experiences of an underrepresented, unfamiliar, and all too often invisible sector of our community. These stories are now being shared and recognized at the local, state, and federal level. The book has been used in medical classrooms with students of nursing, psychiatry, and medicine. It has been included in high school and college curricula. It has been used nationwide by the Migrant Education Program for teaching English to Spanish speakers, and in universities as booklets to teach Spanish to English speakers. It even popped up somehow in a class in Guatemala that used the book to teach English language learners. To be honest, I don't like comics. I find them disorienting, I find them distracting, and it's really hard for me to follow the storyline on the page. But what I have learned is that they are a powerful modality for the transmission of information and the sharing of experiences having to do with health and well-being. They add the taste of peanut butter to the taste of chocolate, and they take the reader to a place that transcends words. We will never know how many lives this book touches or in what way, but I want to end with one story. I want to talk about Josie, who's 11 years old, and she's the daughter of two farm workers who she has spent her whole life on a farm. Her mother tells me that she does very well in school, but she doesn't like to read. The only time that her mother sees her reading is when it's a book she has to read. But one day, Magnolia came home and Josie was curled up on the couch with The Most Costly Journey. She sat there without a break until she reached the last page. Closing the book and sighing with contentment, she asked, "Can you get me more books like that?" So there are no books yet. I have a few ideas. It's a big job stretch from a nurse, so I'll have to talk to my boss. But I hope you'll be inspired to learn more about the Vermont Creative Network and continue to support Vermonters through the creative economy. Thank you.
Thank you. What an amazing story. Thank you for all of your work to share their stories in a way that works for them. Yeah, that's great. Any comments or questions?
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
have a shout out to Mari as one of our volunteer nurses.
Mari's amazing.
And I miss working there. And I'm so pleased that Julia and her amazing family live down the road for me. Friends and constituents.
So I'm going to ask a favor because we are in here until 3:00. I would love a copy of a book. And I know there's a couple others. Is there a way to have some delivered up here? Or would they just be in the card room even after 3:00?
I'd be happy to bring up a number of copies.
Okay.
How many copies would people like?
Here is one.
There's
So
two.
just one more.
I have one at home already.
Okay, so 3.
There you go.
If you'd like to add one to
I don't
our
think everyone
bookshelf,
wants
so there's thumb through one, I think that would be brilliant.
So I know you have very limited time. I don't know if there's a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone have any questions? Do you want these back, first of all? Especially because I don't think
If
any.
anyone speaks Spanish and would like them, I'm happy to keep them.
I know Mari, Bobby.
That's what I got, Despacio.
I just I wanted it to be true to the real nature of the project.
Yes.
Because through this whole thing, I feel it's very important that we maintain what the reason was for this project. Even though the book is great and it has gotten so many people to glimpse the lives of these amazing people, but the real project and the real use of the cartoons was to directly help the population. So
Mari?
I just love that how the creative mind works, not alone, not by itself, but with many streams coming in from the experience of other people, and those driveway moments and those other revelations that happen, whether they're in nature or in strife or stress. So, and I could see those streams coming together for you and the people that worked with you on these.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, there were a lot of different people with a lot of different expertise that were able to come together in the genesis of all of this.
I guess I got a question. I read the first story in your book where the gentleman wanted to go home. How many ultimate goal is to leave?
So this is something that you touch on that is really, really important, because when we look at the federal level and talking about immigration, so much of what these worker permits are tied to is a pathway to citizenship. And I would say the vast majority, probably 80%, if not more, want to earn enough money and go home and live in their country with their food and their family. They don't want to become citizens and they don't want to stay. They just want to be able to work, go home and visit, come back and work.
Daisy and then Art?
So I represent Winooski, and our population of immigrants is a little different. Many of them cannot go back home and don't have, even if they have a desire, they cannot. So they also have stories to tell, and I know there may be a need for similar type of resource. I'm curious what your plans, if any, are to do any future work like this.
You know, the Josie story was what made me really interested in, for me and the population that I work with. The next story that I would like to hear are those kids who either came up from Guatemala, Mexico with their parents as little kids, or those who were born here and really look at what citizenship means to them, what culture means to them, how they identify themselves, and what their lives in Vermont are like. Because I think that's, you know, with a foot in both worlds and being sometimes first generation immigrants, I think that's a really interesting experience. Probably similar to some of the refugees and asylees in your area.
Art, and then we'll have to go on to our other testimony.
Yeah, you mentioned that most of them don't come here to become citizens, they go back home. Is there ever a move in those countries to change what's going on or to improve their own country? It seems to me that if you want to have a life in one of those countries, that the way to do it is to work to change the structure in your own country rather than come here. Not that I care, but to come here, to come all the way up here, make money, than to go all the way back and just continue to do it. It doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, that's a very big question, but I think that the nugget of it is a lot of changing government takes power. And a lot of the people who are coming up and milking cows have no power. They're poor, they're uneducated, they're dark-skinned, which even in Mexico puts them as second-class citizens. So with no connections in the government, a very corrupt government, it makes it virtually impossible to enact change within the country. It really needs to come from either our government saying you got to change, or internally at a government level where, the other piece is, to be real, our money that they're sending home supports their economy. It supports the economy of southern Mexico, and it keeps those people happier because they can survive. And I think if that money wasn't coming in, there probably would be a lot more unrest, but not necessarily the unrest that would cause change.
Thank you for your work and thank you for their work here on our farms.
Well, thank you for taking the time to listen. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I just want to see if our next witnesses are outside. Let's stay on air. Thank you.
Very enthusiastic.
Does great work.
I think we have, yeah. Still chair.
Oh, there are a lot of folks.
Good speak.
And why are we short of chair?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to set up. This is Elisa Stahlberg from the
Yay.
Department of Health and David Englander, whom you may know also. Just let me make sure I'm ready.